Okay, very good. Give me 1 minute. Okay, so it's 3 p.m. in Yogyakarta right now in Indonesia. So I am based in Yogyakarta, which is a 1 hour flight from the capital city of Jakarta, Indonesia. And so I am based in the largest public school, public university in Indonesia, with around 68,000 students and around 3,100 professors, lecturers, and teachers here. And I think this is my second engagement in the program on the online internship program. And I'd like to thank Ambassador Adam for his kindness and generosity, and all of his staff at the Indonesian embassy in Islamabad for cordially inviting me to this program. I'm also a international board member and a regional council for Globe Ethics, which is based in Geneva in Switzerland. And so it's an organization that focuses on all things that are related to ethics. So there are online resources on ethics in English, in French, in Spanish, in German, in Arabic, in Bahasa Indonesia. I'm not quite sure whether we have any sections in Urdu, but clearly it's an international organization with a lot of resources on all things related to ethics, essentially. Hold on. I'm not familiar with the, okay. This is me. Again, I'm also part of the American Indonesian Exchange Foundation, which manages the Fulbright program. So we usually interview and select candidates from Indonesia going to the US, and American scholars coming into Indonesia for studies, for research, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I hold a lot of hats, but I'm mostly based in the university and do a lot of research and collaboration with both the government, academia, academic institutions around the world, but also NGOs. So the first thing I'd like to say is that, Pakistan is not such a foreign country to me. I've been there 3 times, and I was invited by the former Minister of Religion and Interfaith Harmony. And this was one of the events whereby this was in celebration of the Maulud, yeah, where I was invited to give a speech as well before the minister and also some of the religious leaders in the region. We had the Deputy Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar and so on and so forth. So I've been to Pakistan 3 times and have spoken also at the Government College of Women's University in Sialkot, and also at the Sustainable Development Institute in Islamabad. So these are just some of the pictures in which I held the activities with our friends from Pakistan. I also invited a number of Pakistani scholars as well to my university to give a lecture series, especially this one on Allama Iqbal, and how modernity and humanity fits into his sort of worldview of things in his poetry. Yeah, so it's a very exciting time for me to learn about Iqbal as well. And when I was there in Sialkot and going to Lahore, I went also to Manzil Iqbal there, which was very interesting. And so the first thing I'd like to say is that, I'm coming from a country which has a mega diversity. Indonesia has 17,000 islands. So we are perhaps the largest archipelagic nation on earth. Yeah, but only perhaps 3,000 of our islands are inhabited by people. Yeah, but we also have a wide range of floral and faunal species. So animals and plants and flowers and trees. Yeah, And all of this was captured early on from the 19th century by this explorer from Britain called Alfred Russel Wallace, in which he wrote about the Malay archipelago and talked about the different interesting endemic species and very charismatic species in the islands of Indonesia, especially in Sulawesi or Celebes, where ultimately his name was inscribed as one of the sort of founders of what's called the Wallace Line, which looked at the sort of distinction in terms of the species between the sort of western and eastern part of the Sulawesi region. So we have charismatic species like orangutans. Yeah, we have birds of paradise, Komodo, which is perhaps the modern day dinosaur, if you like, yeah, which could only be found in Indonesia. But apart from the terrestrial life, we also are very rich in terms of our marine life and the seascapes and the different kinds of coral environment that we have throughout the country. You know, one of the best diving spots in the world is actually in Indonesia, which is in West Papua, in a place called Raja Ampat, which means the Four Kings, where 75% of the coral species of the world could be found and known to science could be found in this region of Indonesia, which is almost the sort of easternmost part of Indonesia. But apart from the floral and faunal species, we also have around 700 psycholinguistic groups. Yeah? So we have different kinds of ethnic groups with their own sort of separate and distinct languages, system of languages and dialects as well. Yeah, and we have, you know, every province, every district would have its own sort of culinary art, have their own specialty in food, and also ethnic dresses, traditional costumes. I'm sure Pakistan also has similar diversity in terms of the ethnic groups there. And also we are quite known with our variety of batik fabrics, which are often used. You know, most Indonesians use batik for their office use. I mean, I'm currently wearing my own batik right now, yeah. And I'm sure our embassy staff are also wearing their favorite batik shirts as well. And also the songs and dances and so on. And so we are a very sort of diverse and vibrant nation, if you like, yeah. And just to give you a small sort of, you know, picture of Indonesia, you know, Islam is the predominant religion, and the school of thought in which we follow is mostly the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, or the Sunni Islam, and the juridical school is called the Shafi'iyah, or the Shafi'i school of fiqh, of jurisprudence, which is sort of the perhaps the predominant juridical school in the Muslim Southeast Asia. So you find the same kind of you know, followings of the Shafi'i juridical school in Malaysia, in southern Thailand, in southern Philippines, Brunei Darussalam, and others, yeah. And we have what's called local religions as well, or indigenous spiritual belief throughout the country. We don't quite know exactly how many of them, but there are plenty. I mean, I just visited North Sumatra, and I visited one of the foremost indigenous religions and indigenous belief communities there as well, called the Parmalim, which is situated just next to Lake Toba, which has become the sort of one of the most attractive tourist destination in Indonesia. In terms of the state ideology, we have Pancasila, which is the 5 principles that we believe in. One is the belief in one God, and then secondly is on humanity, and thirdly the unity of Indonesia, and fourth is the democracy and deliberation toward consensus, and lastly is on social justice in Indonesia. So that is called the Pancasila, and I'm sure if you know a little bit of Sanskrit, you would know that the term Pancasila actually comes from your region. Now, one of the issues, I mean, I've been tasked to talk about Islam as a, Rahmatan lil Alamiin, or what we call, the mercy for the, or blessings for the multiverse. Yeah? So, and this has become one of the major sort of principles, that in Islam we follow the Quran, and in the Surah An-Nahl, for instance, right, in verse 93, or Al-Anbiya in verse 107, for instance, sorry, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Yeah. So we believe that the Prophet Muhammad, as a messenger of God, had been brought to earth to provide blessings and mercy to the multiverse. Yeah. And this has been sort of one of the cornerstones of Islam's teaching. But if you follow the sort of the main principles and try to derive the sub-principles based on that, then obviously we can find many of the sort of contemporary context to be quite relevant to this teaching about Rahmatan lil Alameen, or Islam as being the sort of blessings for the multiverse. And what this means is that we as Muslims are required essentially to think in terms of multi-species as well, because to think about the alam, to think about the various, multiverse, the various realities that we are facing, yeah, both in terms of humanity, in terms of the animal kingdom, the plant kingdoms, the trees, the flowers, and all kinds of species, and that I think is the one of the core sort of essential teachings of Islam, that we should indeed have respect and appreciate and have this sort of pro-life worldview. And the other thing about this doctrine of Rahmatan lil Alameen is, if you contextualize this in our current understanding, we would know that the world is currently heading toward a multicultural society, that we are becoming more and more multicultural. And as a scholar, I have been to Japan many times, and you would think that Japan is a multicultural society, meaning a homogeneous society with only one ethnic group. But on my third day in my first visit to Japan, I was witness to a conversion of 7 Japanese people converting into Islam, or reverting, whatever term you'd like to use, reverting to Islam at the Kyoto Islamic Cultural Center. And to me, this gives the sort of notion that Japan is changing, that the homogeneous nature of Japan is changing. I just returned from the UK, where I gave some talks and trained lawyers and religious scholars at the Christ Church College in Oxford University. And if you go to these places, you would find a lot of people with, wearing Muslim headscarves and donning Muslim dress. And you'll see that the mosque are quite filled with many migrants, coming in from different parts of the world. Even if you go to London, for instance, one would easily, see the sort of different different sights and sounds of London. If you go to Edgware Road, for instance, you will see a lot of inscriptions in Arabic, in Urdu, in Farsi, and you'll see a lot of Middle Eastern, South Asian restaurants, meaning to say that it's a multicultural world out there. I spent some time also in the US, and you see the same kind of condition, similar in other places. Yeah. And of course, Indonesia, I mean, by its own sort of genetic developments and ethnic groupings, we are a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society. And so one of the sort of precepts of that, and which is a derivation of the principle of Rahmatan lil Alamiin, is to have certain qualities such as tolerance and this idea about pluralism and inclusion. Of course, tolerance is probably the sort of lowest common denominator. And for some people, tolerance is also a negative term, because some people would think to tolerate something means that you are tolerating something bad, and henceforth, to tolerate somebody does not necessarily mean that it's good. But the idea of tolerance is that we should think that it's okay to be different. Yeah. The same thing with pluralism, that there are many realities, there are many experiences that people have in this world, depending on their upbringing, depending on their ethnic identities, and so on and so forth. And also this idea about inclusion and not excluding anybody from the sort of social interaction, politics, economy, and so on and so forth. Of course, to a certain extent, the term inclusion has been sort of, sorry to say, bastardized to sort of include people of extreme sort of characteristics and qualities. Yeah. And this has caused some sort of friction and conflict in many societies. But one of the, for instance, in Indonesia, there is this sort of a misconception, and I think in a number of countries as well, especially in Muslim countries, where if you adopt pluralism, it means that you are assuming that all religions are the same. Yeah. While in fact, pluralism does not assume that at all. Yeah. It assumes that people are different, that people will aspire to different worldviews and different faiths and different traditions. Yeah. And even within our own religion, yeah, whatever it may be, there are a number of differences of opinions and schools of thoughts. I just mentioned about the Shafi'i juridical school of fiqh, for instance. Yeah, there's also the Hanafi, the Maliki, the Hanbali, yeah, and others. And that's just a juridical school, and not to mention the different theological schools, yeah, and the schools within the Islamic metaphysics, yeah, like Sufism and so on and so forth. So there is definitely diversity within religions, and you'll find this not just in Islam, but also in Christianity, in Catholicism, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, and so on and so forth. So I think the main thing to remember is that the main challenge is really, how do we engage people who are different from us, people who have different opinions about some things, about some fundamental values, for instance, or different in terms of their rituals or practices. So I think this has to be one of the issues that many societies are facing. So with that also, there is this sort of varied philosophical stance about religion, about society, about multiculturalism, and so on. And I think the more we study this, the more we would understand that society is much more complex than we would have thought it would be in the first place. But if you look at the general sentiments on Islam and Muslims, we do see a very sort of large discrepancy or misunderstanding about Islam and about Muslims. There had been some sort of pushback in terms of the role of Muslims and Islam in society, and especially post 9/11. Yeah, there has been this sort of suspicion and distrust toward Muslims, whether Muslims can engage modernity and can engage people of other faiths. This has been one of the main questions that have been asked, especially in the Western hemisphere. And these are just some of the issues and challenges that we face. One being, why are Muslims generally more economically backward, for instance? This must also be questioned. I mean, if you look at the GDP, if you look at the investments, if you look at the schooling systems, if you look at the banking systems and infrastructure and so on and so forth. So why are many Muslim societies mostly economically deprived? And why are most Muslim countries undemocratic? That is also one big question as well that has been posed by many Westerners. In fact, there is this theory about this idea about democratic deficit in the Middle East, for instance, or in, generally speaking, the Muslim world. Why can't Muslims adapt and adopt to democracy or democratic systems and processes and elections and so on and so forth? Then the last one is, why are there not much technological innovation in Muslim countries? Now, I know there are many smart people in Pakistan, and many of your industries are also quite advanced, especially in defense industry, in nuclear technology, and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, in many Muslim world, we are seeing that Muslims are lagging behind in terms of their technological innovations and the ability to innovate. And so some of the challenges that we see is this growing sort of Islamophobia. But to me, Islamophobia has been very much sort of a subcategory of a larger phenomenon in which people would call religiophobia, or the fear of religion. And so some people, especially those who are perhaps secularists or atheists or non-theistic people, tend to fear religion because they fear the wrath of religion. They fear the intolerance of many religious people and religious groups in society. And so there has been this pushback and this sort of idea of, how do we prevent Muslims from invading our countries, and all this propaganda against Muslims saying that they should go back to their countries and where they belong and blah, blah, blah. So I think this is one thing that we are seeing. And then there are also hate speech, both in terms of online and offline realities. We are seeing that many people are still misunderstanding about the principles of Islam. And I think for the most part, I think we need to be better spokespeople for Islam. And one of the best ways is to really display a good character and akhlaq before those who do not understand Islam. There's a lot of discrimination as well in terms of policies. I mean, we just heard the recent announcement from the France's Minister of Education, for instance, to prevent Muslim women from wearing the abaya, or the loosely donning of the Muslim dress, which is usually seen in Saudi Arabia or in the Gulf countries, in some parts of India, Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia, and so on and so forth. So stereotyping and stigmatization are just some of these phenomena that we see that are sort of providing that pushback against the development of Islam and the integration of Muslim society in different parts of the world. The other thing I'd like to mention here is, we are facing a different kind of world, since like 20 years ago, we have seen that, reality is divided into many different kinds of, phenomena. And with the rise of the internet and the digital age, we are seeing the role of how social media has transformed our lives. We are constantly sort of online with our friends, with our family members, with our teachers, with our students, and so on, using various internet and social media platforms. Yeah? So on the one hand, we do see a positive sort of impact and effect on how we address certain problems and issues, including in education. And obviously, we saw the direct benefit of the use of these technologies during the COVID-19 pandemic, for instance. But because of that, we are also seeing a fragmentation of the different religious communities and religious authorities. Yeah? When people learn religion nowadays, they don't learn it from the religious leaders in the mosques or in the musallas or in any other Islamic schools. Many of the millenarian generation, for instance, have been learning religion from the internet, from Sheikh Google and Sheikh Facebook and so on. So we are seeing this this culture of instantaneity, and this idea that you can immediately become an expert on Islam, for instance, just by listening to a number of celebrity preachers in Facebook or in YouTube and so on and so forth. There's also this phenomenon called the big data analytics, yeah, meaning to say that we have now, in education and research, we have now come a long way from using small data, and now we are engaging in big data. And the idea is how we can sort of manage the volume and the variety and the veracity of the data that we can find in social media and in the internet. Yeah? So for the large part, we have seen in the way we think about data, in the way we think about reality and various phenomena such as religiosity, such as migration, and so on and so forth, through big data analytics. The other development in the technological arena is the rise of the machine learning systems with artificial intelligence, robotics, and so on. When I was in Oxford just last month, I was approached by two scholars from Birmingham, and they were interested in developing a accompanying application, which they saw was based on a Christian companion application called Messiah, which is basically using open artificial intelligence and using sort of Jesus' avatar to promote Christianity and to provide all kinds of solutions for Christian users. And so they were interested in thinking about how this could be applicable for the 1.8 billion Muslims around the world as well. So we discussed that. I mean, if you're interested in that, I'll talk more about that later on, yeah? But again, as we move toward a more multicultural world, we are also seeing that the world is becoming much more polarized. So there's a lot of friction, there's a lot of competition, contestation, a lot of conflict. They're both online as well as offline, and people are realizing that there are so many different kinds of people, so many different kinds of religions, so many different kinds of cultures, which we don't understand ourselves. I mean, who could understand everything, considering the complexity of the social realities that we are seeing the world heading to, yeah? So in that sense, we need to count our blessings and be thankful that we still have Islam, at least for the most part of us. We are Muslims, and we still have certain sort of values and certain ideas about what an ideal society is all about. And so, we don't fall into nihilism, or this idea that there is no meaning in life, for instance, because for us, the meaning of life for Muslim is really very clear. Yeah, because for us is, you know, to worship Allah and to do good and to prevent evil and those kinds of things. Yeah, we should also try as much as possible to be mindful of not othering others. Yeah, just because they are different, it doesn't mean that they are wrong, and just because they are different, it doesn't mean that they are bad, or that we are better than them. Yeah, or they are better than us. You know, so there needs to be this sort of common understanding that being different is okay, that being different is part and parcel of the divine will and plan of Allah, you know. So so if God had intended or willed, then God would have created all of us, the humans, to be one ummah, to be one nation, you know, so without any discrepancy in terms of our ethnicity, in terms of our religiosity, in terms of our school of thought, in terms of our habits of the mind and habits of the heart, and so on and so forth. But the problem is, if we have that, if we have a uniformed humanity, then what can we learn from each other? There is no learning. There is no mutual learning that is possible among people of the same sort of breed, the same sort of you know, upbringing and philosophical stance and worldviews and so on and so forth. And so, you know, let's be more kind and more emphatic toward others who are different from us. The last thing is that, you know, as much as we are trying to engage, you know, the religious others and people who are different, you know, we need to also be strategic in both our action and propagation. Yeah, because not being strategic means that we are not understanding the reality. We are not reading the situation and the circumstances, you know, good enough. You know, so I think we all need to understand that, you know, it's interesting that the first verse of the Quran, which was revealed, is to read. And to read here does not literally mean to read or recite from a text, but also to read the circumstances, to understand your environment, to understand the milieu, the challenges and opportunities that you have. So in the final analysis, one of the greatest strengths, I think, in Islam is that, you know, we have certain basic tenets and fundamental values that is hard to brush away. I mean, for anyone who was sort of born and bred and, you know, upbrought through Islamic tradition or through the teachings of, you know, Muslim tradition, you know, we are very, as you know, we are very proud of ourselves in terms of being a faithful servant of Allah. Yeah, but it's also easy for anyone, for any human being right now, to be blown away by the super complex realities of the world as we see it right now. Yeah, and so having faith in this sort of dizzying world is really a blessing. And the fact that we are doing this, the fact that we are having this discussion about, you know, Rahmatan Alamiin, for instance, is evidence of the need for us to constantly center ourselves and to not be blown away and not to be easily dismissed by others, yeah, who may be different from us as well. But one of the things that we see in religion is that religious communities tend to think that their tradition is sufficient. And because their tradition is sufficient, that they don't need to learn from other traditions, from other communities. I think this is a weakness of ours. Yeah, so we need to learn as much as possible. We need to learn about the religious others. We need to learn about how some communities succeed and some communities fail in their endeavors. Yeah, because only through mutual learning can we gain and benefit from, improving ourselves and improving our communities. And then also there is this tendency among some conservative Muslims to focus on the next world and not in this world. I think this is also one of the drawbacks in sort of traditional and conservative thinking, that the next world is more important than this world. I think this is a misunderstanding about the conception of reality in Islam. I think one of the things that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has taught us is that, throughout his existence in this world, he only spent 23 years to propagate Islam. And yet look at the world today. After 1,400 years later, there is 1.8 billion people in this world who confess to being followers of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which means that just within 23 years, just within half of his time in this world, or 1/3 of his time in this world, that he has literally changed the course of history, the course of humanity. And so, there's a lot of hard work that needs to be put into this world so that we can be safe in the next world and to be successful in the next world as well. Now, one of the ideas about the Islam Rahmatan lil Alamiin is this idea about Islam wasatiyah, that in the Quran, in Surah An-Nisa, for instance, there is this terminology which is often cited, which is La sharqiyya wa la gharbiyya, so neither east nor west. And so I think that is what Islam is all about. That Islam is not about being, east nor being west, or being, having this ideology or that ideology, being a liberalist or a socialist, and being a Democrat or Republican. But the idea is that being a Muslim, we need to be fair. We need to stand in the middle and stand in the pathway of social justice. I think that is the whole idea about the Islam wasatiyah, and this idea that Islam is brought as a blessing and mercy to all mankind, to all species in the multiverse. The last thing I'd just like to say is that for the more progressive Muslim Islamic scholars, is that we have seen this sort of transition from the preoccupation on the Sharia to the Maqasid al-Sharia, which is the principal objectives of the Sharia. So not just thinking about the sort of outward appearance of the Sharia or the Islamic law, but looking at the principal objectives, at the philosophical underpinnings of the Sharia. So I think the more we can understand this concept, I think the more closer we can get to understanding the true message of Islam, and understanding really that the true message of Islam is really to build a socially just society in this world. So with that, I just like to thank the embassy and all of you for your kind attention. Wabillahi tawfiq wal hidayah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for this informative lecture. And we are very grateful that you teach us and give us a lot of information regarding the topic of today's session. If anyone have any questions, so you can raise hand one by one and ask the question. I think, sir, you explained so well, so there is no student who can ask question. Didn't raise their hands.
Please,
I
by all
think that
means, if you have any questions or queries or comments on my lecture, I'll be happy to discuss with you any of the issues that you raise. You could also write perhaps in the chat if you feel embarrassed or shy.
yes. If anyone have any question, please ask. I don't think so, sir. There is any question because no one is. Okay.
Hello.
Yes.
Assalamualaikum, sir. I would like to ask something about the religious matters. For as we know that Indonesia is Muslim majority state, but there are also other religions such as Christianity, Buddhism, etc. And as Pakistan is also Muslim majority state, so the minority religions here in Pakistan most of the time and quite rightfully feel that the system is neglecting them because the majority is Muslim, so it favors Muslims, and there are also hate, or we can say the hate that is generated by the kind of system that exists here because it does not promote the pluralism or the religious coexistence. So how in Indonesia other religions are incorporated into the system, and so that they will not feel left out or discriminated in the system.
Yes, thank you very much, Salma, for your question. And indeed, Indonesia is like Pakistan in many respects. So Indonesia is supposedly the largest Muslim populated country in the world. So altogether, we are around perhaps 280 million people, in which 87.5% are Muslims. And of course, we also have a large majority of Christians. And when we say Christians, we mean Catholics and Protestants. Yeah. And so in Indonesia, we distinguish between Catholics and Protestants. And combined, we call it in the West, in English, as Christianity. But then we have a large portion of Hindus as well. We have one island called Bali, which is called the land of the gods, because there are so many places of worship for the Hindus there. But most of the Balinese are Hindus. And so it's a Hindu populated island, and it's one of the best international tourist destinations of the world. So we see a lot of people coming from different parts of the world, mostly from Australia, from China, Korea, Japan, Europe, America, and so on and so forth. Yeah. We also have Buddhists, and we have some pockets of Buddhist in Java, in Central Java, in East Java, but also in other places, in like South Sumatra, in other places as well. In fact, if you come to Indonesia, some of the top destinations of tourism here are actually Buddhist and Hindu temples. Yeah, from where I'm living right now in Yogyakarta, for instance, we have the largest single structure Buddhist temple in the world, which is called Borobudur. Yeah, but we also have a very old 8th and 9th century Hindu temple as well, called Prambanan, which is only about 15 minutes away from my university. And many of the foreign tourists would flock these places to see these edifices, to see these architectural magnificence. Yeah? And so the other thing is that we also have Confucianists. Yeah, so we have 6 religions in which the government provides services to, so i.e. Islam, Christianity or Protestantism, Catholicism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. But above and beyond that, we also have quite a number of Baha'is, we have Jews, we have people of different kinds of religions, both world religions, but also, as I mentioned, indigenous beliefs, or local religions, as some of us would call it. And we have a very powerful Ministry of Religious Affairs. But up until now, the Ministry of Religious Affairs only provides services to the 6 religions. But then the other religions and the other religious communities are provided protection by the government. And so we have a law on religion. We have laws and regulations and policies on interfaith harmony. We have what's called the Interfaith Harmony Fora in different levels, at the national level, at the provincial level, at the district level, at the even some in sub-district levels, throughout the country. And these forums are representatives of the different religious communities. And one of their functions is really to diffuse conflict before it occurs. And so this has been one of the major work of the Ministry of Religious Affairs, which is to promote also interfaith relations and understanding among religious communities. There have been problems here and there, but generally speaking, I think it would be safe to say that these interreligious fora have been working for the benefit of religious in Indonesia. I think for the most part, especially being a scholar of religion and teaching religion here in Indonesia, I have often told my students and the audiences in the different international conferences that I attend that we should not, stick to this majority-minority binary thinking. Yeah, because oftentimes this majority-minority binary categorizations are self-defeating for our society. Yeah, because I mean, consider the fact that Indonesia was previously a Buddhist country and previously a Hindu country, or at least predominantly Hindu and predominantly Buddhist, right? And now we are predominantly Muslim, right? So it's not a static kind of circumstance. Demographies change, and they change for better or worse, right? And so countries also change in terms of their demography, in terms of their religious affiliation. So stating majority, minority, and deploying this dual categorization, oftentimes, we fall into inaccuracy. We fall into the idea that these categorizations are fixed and that they are unchanging, that they are historical, while in fact they are not unchanging. They are not historical. They're actually against the historical understanding of nations all around. So I think that needs to be highlighted. The other thing is, we have this huge program on religious moderation by the government, and I myself have been engaged in the issue of religious literacy and teaching and training religious extension officers, for instance, throughout the country. And one of the things that I discovered was that, as much as we might believe in our religion and as much understanding and knowledge we have of our own religion and religious traditions, come to think of it, we don't know, we are next to nothing in terms of understanding the religion of our neighbors, the religion of, the others. And so this is the irony. Without having some basic understanding and framework of understanding the religious others, there would be no negotiation or interaction, healthy interaction among religious communities. because there would always be distrust, there would always be misunderstandings and frictions and ultimately conflict. Even within the sort of Muslim body politic here in Indonesia, we try hard to promote, understanding among the different schools of thought, for instance, between the Nahdlatul Ulama, who are considered as more traditionalists, the Muhammadiyah, which are considered the more modernists, and then we have the Shias, and then we have the Ahmadis, and then now we have the Neo-Salafis, the Wahhabis, and so on and so forth. So what we try to do is to have certain conversations and try to sort of avoid talking, passing each other, and not, putting effort in terms of understanding each other's positions and each other's understanding about, each of the respective communities' religiosity. So I think that is an important thing. The same thing with the Christians. There's a wide variety of Christians in Indonesia here, not just the Catholics and the Protestants, but we also have Eastern Orthodox. We also have the Jehovah's Witness. We also have the Latter-day Saints, for instance, the Mormons, and many other Christian denominations in which in other more conservative Christian communities might be considered as blasphemous or outside of Christianity or unrecognized as a legitimate and valid school of Christianity. Similarly in Buddhism, for instance. I mean, Buddhism, some of the more sort of righteous and conservative Buddhists would say, there's no such thing as Taoism, that we are different from Taoism, and we're different from other forms of, Buddhism, and we only adhere to the sort of Indonesian version of Buddhism. And similarly for the Hindus, the Balinese Hindus would say, the Hindutva ideology is not contextual to Indonesia, is not contextual to Bali. And the movements by Sai Baba, the movements by Hare Krishna, they are not in jive with the sort of Balinese understanding of Hinduism, right? So, in that manner, we need to understand that religions have different kinds of manifestations and practices. So there is not just one Islam. There are many manifestations of Islam, but the idea remains the same. The core teachings remain the same. But I guess that is one of the things that is being debated by these religious communities. And oftentimes the debates are very atomistic, So they're looking at very specific injunctions and specific doctrines of the specific schools. And therefore, some people don't understand why, some Muslims would fight other Muslims, or some Christians would fight other Christians, or some Hindus would fight and have, friction with other Hindu communities, and so on and so forth. So again, I think we need to be more sort of be familiar with the fact that the world is becoming much more multicultural, much more multi-religious, multi-ethnic, and that, there are bound to be people out there who are different from us. And this is one thing that we need to sincerely hold as our sort of understanding of the current realities. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who want to ask any question regarding today's topic? No, sir, I don't think so that there's any student wants to ask questions. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for the lecture.
Okay, thank
Allah
you very
Hafiz.
much. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Allah Hafiz.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Khuda hafiz.
Makasih Pak. Khuda hafiz.
Terima kasih.
Sama-sama. Thank you everybody.